everyone, my name is Prahita Ningarum. I want to present my presentation about linguistic ethnography to fulfill my assignment in research method in linguistic. Let me start my presentation. Well, I have 4 main points to talk about and 1 extra point. I'll discuss about background, linguistic ethnography and interaction, questions and key issues in linguistic ethnography, application of methods, and the last is conclusion. Background. Linguistic ethnography is a theoretical and analytical framework which takes an epistemological position, broadly aligns with social constructivist and post-structuralist approaches by critiquing essentialist accounts of social life. It also draws widely on work in linguistic anthropology. Next, linguistic ethnography and interaction. The ethnographic approach is one which sees the analysis of small phenomena as set against an analysis of big phenomena, and in which both levels can only be understood in terms of one another. For example, Chris describes the interactional practices of teachers in multi-adult classrooms and shows how teachers' interactional practices unwittingly reproduce structural hierarchies in schools. Using linguistic ethnography, she illustrates how facilitation pedagogy is best suited for language teaching and learning, holding real currency in a context where pedagogies of transmission dominate classroom practices. Chris' study shows how small phenomena such as the interactional differences between teachers can only be understood against an analysis of big phenomena, like the systemic and structural privileging of curriculum transmission. A linguistic ethnography analysis then attempts to combine close detail of local action and interaction as embedded in a wider social world. Move to another slide, question and key issues in linguistic ethnography. This section will deal with 2 key issues in linguistic ethnography. The first relates to interdisciplinarity of linguistic ethnography, and the second key issue is ethnography and post-structuralism. Next, linguistic ethnography as interdisciplinary research. Linguistic ethnographies as interdisciplinary linguistic ethnography's interpretative stance is shaped by a disciplinary eclecticism. It is the interdisciplinary nature of linguistic ethnography that allows us to look closely and look locally, while tying observation to broader relation of power and ideology. Recently, there has been an emphasis of the advantage of combining analytical approaches rather than relying on only one approach or framework. By combining different approaches, different perspectives can be brought to the same interaction. For example, a linguistic ethnographic approach might analyze a piece of classroom data using a range of discursive traditions while keeping the ethnographic context central to its interpretation. Thus, while ethnography holds that understandings of participants as social agents within context is central to any interpretation, the researcher might draw on other discourse approaches which don't necessarily view context in the same way. This might happen referring to systematic functional discourse analysis (SFDA) or conversation analysis (CA). Systemic functional discourse analysis (SFDA) could be used alongside ethnography to provide delicacy at the level of describing speech acts by focusing on discursal features such as follow-up moves and question-answer sequence, The SFDA could also be used alongside ethnographic field notes to further an understanding of how language structures a context. For example, research on classroom might use SFDA to understand the structure of or boundary exchange among classroom participants, and at the same time, relevant field notes for detailed descriptions over time of the significance of such exchange to the participants themselves and to the researcher. Field notes would then be used to show how aspects of social practice become both meaningful for the participant and unit of analysis or for the researcher in the interpretative process. Conversation analysis (CA) could similarly be used with linguistic ethnography to reveal the subtle shifts and sequences in the social organization of conversation or talk and interaction. CA, through its repeated listening and precise transcription, enables subtle analysis of interactional features such as common adjacency pairs, opening and closings, speaker selections, wait time, overlap, repair, interruptions, directives, hesitancy, and uncertainty. CA could be used alongside microethnography to look closely and repeatedly at what people do in real time as they interact, while ethnography would be used to provide the interpretative detail to explain and give depth to the linguistic analysis. Next, ethnography and post-structuralism. Linguistic ethnography's ability to keep up methodologically in a field of study which has seen radical changes in its conceptualization of its key terminology, such as culture, community, and language. Eisenhardt's three models of ethnography past, present, and future, the trouble with culture, the enthusiasm or not for ethnography, and ethnography's responsibility to represent multiple and diverse perspectives or voices. Well, what are three models of Eisenhardt? Let's see in the next slide. The first model is the trouble with culture. We can no longer work with a view of culture as relatively enduring, coherent, and bounded, for we cannot use the term culture to identify social groups of people with a culture that is clearly bounded and determined, internally coherent, and uniformly meaningful. The second model is the enthusiasm or not for ethnography, focusing on the limitation for the sole ethnographer to participate in various settings, devote significant time to the research, and do justice to her areas of special interest and expertise. Aspects of contemporary life, such as struggles within groups, movements of people across time and space, internet communications, extra-local networks, consumerism, and the mass media can only be addressed superficially through coherent ethnographic methods. The third model is ethnography responsibility to represent and diverse perspectives or voices, suggesting, for example, that ethnographers of education should use their findings for positive educational intervention. The tension here lies in protecting those being researched while simultaneously meeting the need for detail and description required in ethnography. Eisenhardt points out that in protecting some participants, the writer may also expose or privilege others. In describing how ethnography should tidy up these three models, Asian Hearts describes ways in which ethnographers can respond. First, use of collaborative teams to broaden insight and perspectives. Second, development of models stressing mutual and shared relationship between researcher and researcher. Third, experiments in writing that allow more perspectives or voices to be revealed in final accounts. Fourth, use of research narratives which show divisions, struggles, or inconsistencies in the data. Fifth, use the different media beyond textual writing to represent the data, engaging audience through film, literature, TV, or computer. 6. A movement away from focus on individual people and an emphasis on new technologies to understand the translocal rather than only the local. Next, application of methods. Traditionally in ethnography, one research works alone to collect the data, analyze the results, and write up the findings. Analysis of the data focuses on the identification and interpretation of particular patterns of action and talk that characterize a group of people in a social context. This is achieved through participant observation, field notes, ethnographic and open interviews, and of the recording or transcript. Ethnography thus offers descriptions and perspectives which are not only meaningful to the participant themselves but also to the researcher. The investment of self in the writing of field notes and the centrality of the researcher in ethnography is fundamental. Blumert argues that field work is more than data collection. The field notes, videotapes, even interview transcripts are not data themselves, but resources for data. Documentary material from which data must be constructed through some formal means to analysis. Collaborative teams are being used to involve different kinds of people in designing the research process and creating final accounts. This collaboration requires the researchers to disclose more about their own views, commitments, and social position that researchers use. The interpretative process to construct materials into data through their own participation in the research. Next, the last is conclusion. This is the last part of my presentation. Linguistic ethnography offers a new perspective relevant to researchers working in the social sciences and postmodernity. Substantial development in U.S. linguistic anthropology and the turn to post-structuralist accounts of discourse and meaning making in the literature in the United Kingdom and Europe have allowed linguistic ethnography to draw on more hybrid literatures in its analytical framework than those traditionally associated with the ethnography of communication. Linguistic ethnography argues that the combination of linguistic with ethnography and their different analytical tools offer a greater set of resources than each field of study could offer on its own. Well, thank you for your attention.